Muy buenos días, señoras y señores, damas y caballeros, invitados especiales, amigos, amigas, público en general. Les doy nuevamente una cordial bienvenida a este segundo día del Foro Internacional Global de la Industria del Gas Natural Licuado 2025. Mi nombre es Carla Palacios, seré su anfitriona y maestra de ceremonia el día de hoy. Para el día de hoy tenemos tecnologías, soluciones flotantes, innovación y operaciones dentro de la industria del gas natural licuado en el mundo. Esta mañana iniciamos con el panel Soluciones flotantes, mejorando el suministro y la importación de GNL en América Latina y el Caribe. A las personas que aún continúan de pie, sobre todo en la parte de atrás de la sala, por favor les pido que tomen asiento en sus respectivos lugares porque ya están con nosotros las personas que van a conformar el primer panel de este segundo día de evento. Y justamente este panel abordará el papel cada vez más relevante que tienen las soluciones flotantes como las unidades flotantes de almacenamiento y regasificación en el suministro de gas natural licuado justamente en la región. Estas tecnologías ofrecen flexibilidad, rapidez en la implementación y ventajas competitivas, convirtiéndose en una alternativa estratégica para ampliar el acceso al GNL en mercados emergentes. Y en esta sesión, destacados expertos van a compartir su visión sobre cómo las soluciones flotantes están transformando la seguridad energética y abriendo nuevas oportunidades de desarrollo en América Latina y el Caribe. Invito al escenario a la señora Chaoyang Lee, presidente de las Américas en Horizon New Energies de los Estados Unidos. Adelante, la recibimos por favor con un fuerte aplauso. Invito también a la señora María Chan, directora de Proyectos de Exmar de Bélgica, a la señora Carolina von Lachmann, jefe de las Américas de FLNG de Brasil. Quiero invitar al señor Terrence Roberts, director de Desarrollo de Negocios Globales de la empresa ABS de los Estados Unidos. Invito a esta hora al señor Juan Huarín, gerente de Desarrollo de Negocios de la empresa Sofec, también de los Estados Unidos. Invito al señor Celso Rodríguez, director de Proyectos de Short Tension en Países Bajos. Bienvenidos, ellos son las personas que van a exponer el día de hoy. Y por último, invito al señor moderador, que es el señor Mehdi Tuil, especialista en gas natural licuado de la empresa Solaris de Canadá, que el día de ayer también estuvo compartiendo con nosotros una ponencia. Muchísimas gracias a cada uno de ellos. Entonces ya está el panel completo. Señor Tuil, puede empezar entonces con la moderación. Adelante.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone, for the first panel of the day. I hope you have an enjoyable day yesterday and a nice evening as well. So today we'll be covering FLNGs, not only floating liquefaction facilities, but also import terminals. So we'll explore the growing role of those facilities in unlocking LNG demand for the region, but also export potential. So we'll cover the flexibility, the cost efficiency, the speed to market. So those are some of the features that have been often touted and linked to FLNG solutions. But let me tell you something. FLNG's projects are quite complex. It's not a simple technical feature to develop. And those come with very various limitations in terms of deployment. So first, I would like to give the floor to the panelists to introduce themselves and their companies. So, Chaoyang, please.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Chaoyang Lee, and I am the head for the Americas region for Ofrecen New Technologies. We're a Chinese EPC. Thank you.
Good morning. I would like to start first thanking Kena for organizing all this and letting us share our thoughts with all of you. My name is Maria Carolina Chang. I am Venezuelan, and I work for Exmar, which is a Belgian company, a maritime company that has 200 years established. I act as project director and asset manager.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, GNL Global Forum, for making sure that we all come together in Latin America, which is definitely very important for our industry. I'm Carolina von Lachmann. I'm Brazilian, and I represent BW LNG in the Americas. Over here, we have two floating projects in Brazil and in El Salvador, helping secure energy in our region. I'm very happy to be here speaking to you today.
Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you to Ken as well for inviting me to be a part of this distinguished panel. My name is Terrence Roberts. I'm the Global Manager for FLNG for ABS. ABS is part of IACS, which is an International Association of Class Societies. Our job is to make sure that the floating projects adhere to the rules, regulations, and standards provided by the regulatory authority in the country. I'm happy to be here.
Buenos días. My name is Juan Carlos Guarín. I work for a company named Sofec as a business development manager. Sofec is a company of MODEC, and MODEC is one of the global leaders in floating production, FPSOs. And we as Sofec, we do mooring systems for all type of floaters, including FPSOs, FLNGs, FSRUs, etc. And same as the other guys also. Thank you, Kenna, for the opportunity and to the organization.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Celso Rodriguez with Short Tension Dynamic Mooring Systems. Kenna, thank you for inviting me to the panel. I appreciate it. Short Tension is a dynamic mooring company based in the Netherlands. We have units in over 27 countries and 67 ports. Right now, we have, for those of you that went on the tour, we have our VST systems at the PLNG plant.
Thank you, panelists. So I will start with the EPC perspective with Shaoyan here. So FLNG solution has been always presented with the features of speed to market, cost-efficient solutions, but we know that it took many years for the segment to develop into what is it today and to mature in the effective solution. So how the market now is transitioning at aiming really at developing integrated floating solutions for LNG market?
Well, thanks. That's a very great question. FLNG, the concept has been around the market for several decades since it was first brought out, like around the 70s. So along the years, there's several companies, like several units being developed and actually put in operation. So at the beginning, I would say that the concept was first brought to market to unlock the resources from the stranded area. But now the segment realized that actually FLNG is a very, very effective way to monetize the natural gas resources in a more cost-effective way, schedule-friendly, environment-friendly, and what's called like, I would say like a very, I'm sorry. So looking at the industry, like the integrated solution, I guess we are developing from different angles, like the technically, and we incorporated like several technologies, like in terms of liquefaction and also the mooring, and so to adapt to different like situations, will require a FLNG unit. And also commercially, like the industry, the tendency is to reduce the overall CapEx and also the OpEx alongside the execution. And also like from the emission, like environment-friendly aspect, like the people are looking at to reduce the CO2 emission as much as possible. And regulators-wise, I mean, we have to really start with early engagement with local government and all the class societies. At the end, what the segment expecting is something that can be engaged in a shorter time at a more cost-effective way, and that can be adapted in more situations.
Thank you. So as a follow-up to that question to Maria, and Exmar has been pioneering floating solution for many years, and he has a lot of expertise into that side. So two words that come often cited along floating LNG is flexibility and customization. So can you expand into that?
Yes, absolutely, Mehdi. So indeed, Exmar has been very much involved in several floating terminals. We based ourselves on floating solutions. I will try to answer your question based on my experience. I work with implementation of projects. So for sure, we've had, for example, the Caribbean FLNG project, which we did, we built at Wison.
Yes.
And delivered to Exmar in 2017. It went in 2018 to Argentina. We implemented it there. Well, before that, it was initially built to start up an export terminal in Tolú, in Coveñas, in Colombia. That project didn't go through, so thereafter in 2018, we went to Argentina. And due to force majeure after the pandemic, that contract was terminated, and we ended up in Congo, near shore, 7 kilometers close to Point Noir, with a very different setup where we needed to combine the FLNG with a floating storage unit. So we can see that a unit that was built specifically for the conditions of Tolú, which were very benign, ended up offshore after several modifications and reviews, of course, to adjust to the mid-ocean conditions. But floating units allow that, allow the possibility to be relocated, to be readjusted. I recall last year in Panama, in GNL Global, there was a very wise comment that onshore doesn't compete with floating and vice versa, and that is correct. Each project has its strategy well defined, but for sure the flexibility of the floating solution is cannot be compared to shore solutions. So I think that that's the main feature, the main attraction of floating solutions, besides, of course, what Xiaoyan just mentioned, cost efficiency, time, you work on it in a contained environment, which allows to reduce the timeline. So for sure, main feature of floating solutions is the flexibility. And you are able to customize a solution to the specific conditions, like we did for Argentina and we did thereafter for Congo. So absolutely, I fully agree with that statement.
Valid point, thank you. Carolina, next question for you. So we've heard yesterday about this amazing project. I told you I have been following for years the GNA in the port of Açu in Brazil, an amazing example of a successful integration of an LNG to power project. So FSRUs, especially in Brazil, are seen as gas to power enablers for the region in terms of the power mix. Can you expand into that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Mehdi. I think I just want to go back very quickly, just step backwards to yesterday, where we heard where, you know, the Latin American region is responsible for about 3 to 5% of the LNG imports. And, you know, this is something that definitely has room to grow. But if we think of FSRUs and assets in this region, the figures change completely. In about 55 to 60 FSRUs that are, you know, they're available worldwide, our region has about 13 to 15, depending on seasonality, which is the flexibility you were talking about. So if we are responsible for 3 to 5% of imports, but we have 15 out of 60 assets of regasification, you can imagine how successful the region has been in floating solutions. And for many different reasons, of course. But something very unique about Latin America that floating solutions have been enablers is to secure energy, not only in the molecule perspective, but also in the electrons perspective. And then I just want to tie again with something we heard yesterday about the possibility of regional integration. And in terms of electrons, this is definitely already happening. We are seeing this. Our project in El Salvador, for example, the FSRU and LNG enable electrification and regional connectivity through electrons. And so definitely LNG and floating solutions are enablers in that way to secure energy, both in terms of molecules and electrons. One of the things also that I think it's very important to remember, and it becomes very visible in projects like GNA, in projects like EDP in El Salvador, and projects that are coming up, for example, in Colombia and others, Petrobras in Brazil and Dominican Republic and Guatemala. I can go on and on. There are many projects that are coming up in our regions, is that Latin America, with this specific niche of gas to power, or actually LNG to power in that case, is actually pushing the industries to create solutions for the region, which is very powerful. And again, if we think back on, 3 to 5% of imports comes here only, but we're still this massive force, and we're empowering each other in the region to make sure that the industry hears us. This is quite a statement from a regional perspective. And just to give some examples to that, when we talk about flexibility, when we talk about energy security, we also need to talk about energy transition, right? So renewables. What does renewables mean to LNG? Well, LNG needs to be flexible, which sometimes gas isn't, for example, in the case of specifically Brazil. And so what does that do is we have to then cater for this many other solutions that requires LNG to be flexible. So a couple of examples. How is Latin America pushing the industry to be creative and to tailor solutions to their floating needs? GNA, for example, we have GNA represented in this conference. GNA is fully flexible power plant. Like many others in Brazil, we have BW, we have Accelerate, we have Energos. They're all catering to fully flexible power plants where they are the sole source of fuel. And what this does is, for example, in BW and BW Magna perspective, we have been already a year and a half with no gas send out, no regasified LNG send out. And this is very important in terms of what our technologies are available to cater for boil-off gas, for example. So this is one of the ways that Latin America is really pushing the industry for a solution. There are other examples. The line pack usually for gas to power or LNG to power project is very tight. So we have to make sure that we're enabling these power plants to nominate as they best can, the best way they can do it. Sometimes it's not the same as the LNG to grid project. So, in general, FSRU providers historically in the very beginning, usually nominations are volumetric. But for LNG to power projects, most of the times this doesn't really work because the energy and volumetric requirements of a power plant change during the day. So what we are doing, what the industry is pushing now, for example, is maybe we should go pressure-based. Maybe we need to follow the pressure requirements of the power plant instead of the volumetric requirements of the power plants. So if we let this sink in a bit, it's very interesting to take a perspective of how the industry is how the Latin American region actually is really asking the industry to step up and posing questions about flexibility, about reliability, about availability that in a gas to power perspective, in an LNG to power perspective, that many other regions are not yet quite there. So we are the early adopters and the front runners, Mary, really in many of these scenarios, which is again very interesting if you're here and you're thinking about the future. So I think gas to power, LNG to power, LNG to grid, very different projects that require lots of tailor-made solutions. And I'm very happy that, this group in this room, we're really pushing for solutions on those sides.
Very interesting. So I like the comment you made on the volumetric flow versus pressure consideration. So I'm coming from the production side, liquefaction side of the industry. We use volumes for metering purposes, for custody transfer, but we rely on pressure as well. So my assumption was that the other side of the industry would use the same metrics to configure, or maybe the heat rate of the power plant. But this is a very good point. Thank you for sharing it. Terence, so all the innovation, the maturing segments, the new solutions, we are not talking about novelty for FLNG facilities. It's been proven, it's a proven concept. But I think that many projects are still failing to grasp the challenges on the permitting side. So I think the technical regulatory compliance is key in the success of any FLNG project. Can you expand into that?
Yeah, Mehdi, that's a very good question. You're absolutely right. The FLNGs have evolved quite a bit since Prelude, correct? There's so much that has kind of come out from that, and one of the things that Choyon and Maria mentioned was the flexibility. They're modular, so there's a lot of different components that are going into that. So when you're thinking about that, it's often forgotten that there is a regulatory framework that you have to adhere to in order to get these projects to work. So no matter how sound your project is, if you can't get your applications or your licenses, it doesn't matter, right? Because you won't be able to go to market, you won't be able to install, you won't be able to commission and get the project off the ground. So one of the things that ABS does, what we do is we come in as early as possible to be able to help our clients kind of guide them to a regulatory, I guess, matrix, so to speak, to be able to, I guess, get their project ready for this specific application. There's a lot of things that need to be considered before you install a FLNG. You have to look at the environment, the ocean, the different types of, I guess, elements that go into it. And these are all things that we consider that sometimes the project developers may not even look at. They may not even think about it until it's too late. One of the things we talked about yesterday was, I'll give you guys an example. There was a project that we were talking about, and they were wanting to do it on the riverway. Well, the problem was the actual unit would be too big to sail through the riverway. So your entire project would have to change based on that alone. So, so from that standpoint, we were able to come in and tell them, like, hey, you have to look at the specific location, their requirements. And a lot of times, our job is also to help educate the regulators. Because a lot of these FLNGs, FSRUs are going into places they have no clue what they are, right? So they'll come to someone that's a trusted, class society, and they'll say, hey, what do we do with this? You guys have more experience with this. You've worked with FPSOs and drilling units and things like that. What is FLNG? And it's essentially a floating plant, right? So there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of safety things that need to be considered. So from both ends, we're able to help people understand that, and then that helps guide their projects along. I don't want to get into the commercial aspects of it, but you talk about return of investments and things like that. These are things that can hinder a project and will slow them down. So ultimately, it can affect the ROI of projects. So,
thank you. So, Juan.
May I jump in?
Yes, please.
Just a minute on what Terence just said. I just want to highlight what you said. Early involvement is key from class and from the regulators for sure. It does have a direct impact in the overall investment. If you are too late learning that your project cannot be implemented or that you're in a very late stage of the fabrication building or implementation of the project and you need to make changes, this is very costly and will have for sure an impact. So I agree with you, it has to be early involvement.
Yeah. That's good. That's a good point. And I'll just add one more point to that. Even, like you said, the early engagement is very important. Even in picking out the topside providers, all that stuff matters, right? Because, again, based on their design and the application, there might not be a fit there. So you may have to change something from cooling systems to water, all that stuff matters. So it's very important. Early engagement, like you said, is key in a lot of these projects. So.
Thank you. Juan, FLNGs require full technical ecosystem of supporting facilities, auxiliary equipment. Mooring has been always a key component of any FLNG project. It's one of the parts that enables the FLNG to be operated safely and continuously in terms of operational reliability. So what information is necessary to design and optimize a mooring system for FLNG solutions?
Yeah, thank you, Megdi. And this goes in hand with what they just talked here, early engagement. Sometimes the mooring systems are overlooked and comes into the planning of a project at a later stages. And it's quite important because the mooring system, some of the mooring system we do is not only the mooring system, but also the fluid transfer system. So, of course, it's quite important. We need to, so as far as information for designing a mooring system, there are basics, of course. We need to know the geotechnical information to know what kind of soils are in the area to determine what kind of anchoring is going to be needed. It's going to be piles, it's going to be drag anchors. We need to know the metocean conditions, which include currents, winds, significant waves, and so on, so we can determine what type of, the size of the legs, the chains, and all that. We need to know in this case of gas, the fluid properties. But most of the time we transfer not the LNG, not the cryogenic. We transfer only if it's an FSRU, what goes through our system is already the gas regasified.
Yes.
or if it's an FLNG, the gas goes before going into the LNG to be liquefied. So it's always in gas state. So basically those, we need to know geotechnical, method as much complete. And I know that geotechnical, sometimes they have like a geophysical, but geophysical is not enough. Because geotechnical, you need to have core samples that are deep down and according to class. So if we follow, ABS has their rules for geotechnical, they have to approve all the mooring points. So it's not something that, and a geotechnical campaign can take 6 months. So this is something that we always as the client, do your technical campaign as soon as possible because everything can delay a project. So those will be the key elements, Megri, method, geotechnical, and fluid properties.
Thank you. So, Celso, the question for you. So I would like first to thank again Peru LNG for the very insightful visit to the site, the liquefaction site. I'm a seasoned liquefaction operator, and I learned many things that day. And part of that, I heard very nice comments from Peru LNG team for the marine side on the amazing numbers that they were able to achieve in terms of berth availability, thanks to the additional new technology that has been installed on the berth. So how proper design of new terminals can maintain production rates?
Yeah, and for those of you that went on the visit, what Mehdi is referring to is Peru LNG's gains in berth availability going from 70 to 90%, which is quite an impact for them to maintain production. So when you have an LNG facility, everyone's aware that they have to keep the plant online running. Them running, making production is making revenue. When they hit tank tops and they can't load vessels and the berth isn't available, they're going to hit tank tops, they're going to have to curtail production or possibly stop production if it gets to that point. So it's very critical in the design that you really see anything that can impact your loading, what's going to potentially shut your berth down. So it's way better to spend the money up front in that design, in that analysis. Spend the money on, looking at everything that can impact it. Not only, swell, which is waves, but also potential if you're depending on where you're located, suction of passing vessels, wind. There's a lot of things you need to analysis with the wave spectrum to make sure you understand that. Because anything can shut down your plant, and doing the design and reacting to these things after you've built it is very difficult. Dynamic mooring is a great product, but it can't solve everything, right? And a lot of your options out there can't solve everything. So you better understand that, because when you go to your management and tell them you can't load vessels for the next 2 weeks because of the wave conditions, they're going to, well, what happened with the design? Well, you have to spend the money on the dynamic mooring analysis. You have to spend money understanding the waves. You have to create models, multiple models, not only models for the conditions today, but in the environment we're in with climate change. These conditions are going to worsen. We're seeing the trends. We're seeing the worsen. You actually want to work with those people, the right people that do the models, and make sure they understand how long is your facility going to be in service, 20 years? Understand that 20-year projection in the changes in the environment. Because if you have to have that, because like I said, reacting to it is sometimes not possible, very difficult, or you might have to shut your whole plant down for a year to get that increased in berth availability.
That's true, that's true. So for people who are not on the technical side, shutting down in the case of a tank top situation, when your tanks are full and you can not export them, you cannot load, this will impact the whole supply chain. And for a cryogenic plant, warming up and cooling down is a whole new level of complexity. It's quite difficult to maintain an LNG train into cold conditions. You need to think about upstream, your compression stations, your production wells, your gas treatment. So everything will be impacted. And this is not a push-on, push-off solution. So the restart process is quite heavy. So knowing that something as small as this can impact the whole supply chain, and yes, this is...
Yeah, with facilities, I used to be in oil and gas in another life, so I know when you're building a processing facility, everyone's high-fiving when the pipe's installed. Yeah, they don't, really know about the electrical and instrumentation. That's a whole other story. But then, of course, behind the electrical instrumentation is your port terminal sometimes. That's not given the emphasis it needs, and we're seeing it firsthand, the amount of calls we're getting on older facilities, not even that old. Some facilities that were just put in a year ago already are exceeding and having berth closures. So I think it's very important to understand that, because sometimes there is no solution.
Can I interject, Mary?
Yes.
I think this is a very important point, and thank you so much for bringing it up. And I would add a complexity on top of that. If you don't, again, put the money up front and do your work before that all happens, and you go on and you start operating, the added complexity on the FSRU side and on the floating terminal side is that many of these, again, floating solutions come to enable flexibility. I think flexibility is the word that we've been talking about here in terms of the floating solutions and what they enable. But what flexibility does, it adds on to complexity as well. So imagine if you have to do all of these models to ensure that your DMA, to ensure that your port terminal is efficient and is the way that is working towards and enabling your production and everything that comes downstream. If you add on top of that the fact that you need to be flexible, you need to respond quickly to a power grid that is full of renewables, and suddenly it stopped raining, and suddenly it stopped, the sun stopped shining, and suddenly the wind stopped blowing. But then you have the Metocean coming in and the swells are big at the same time that the rain stopped. Then what do you do? Because then what we're talking about here, really, if we kind of really drill down and be very simplistic about it, is that many times LNG is a battery type for many of the Latin American countries, really, when it doesn't rain, when the wind doesn't blow, when the sun doesn't shine. It's our battery, and it's very dispatchable. But then if you don't have access to this battery pool, then what? So I think that's a very important point, and I think one that every project developer needs to make sure that this is really properly taken care of. So thank you so much for bringing this to our attention.
Great point, thank you. So, Chaoyuan, I will go back to one word you mentioned, and we used to hear it a lot when talking about FLNG on the liquefaction side, stranded assets. So today, nobody's saying stranded assets when they are trying to develop an FLNG facility. We are talking about bankable solutions, speed to market, but something that really impressed me when I visited your yard in China recently, the complexity of constructing, developing, and executing an FLNG project, especially when we're talking about large-scale FLNG solutions. So yes, the market has matured. It's not a novelty anymore, but it's still a complex endeavor, yes?
Yes, indeed, FLNG, although at the end what you look at is one single floater, but indeed it's a really, really complicated system to develop. So as an EPC, like starting from engineering side, we will have to incorporate as many as like the philosophies and aspects, and not only from execution standpoint, but also from operation standpoint. We need to consider like the safety, also the Metocean environment, local regulatory, and at the end, we have to develop something that really match what the project is required, and it can be operated like safely in an offshore environment. Actually, I want to like take one more step back to your first question. Yeah. So FLNG, I know the other panelists, they're talking about how to move the LNG and how to regas and how to send to the area where they need. But what FLNG does is actually from the source to, we all know that natural gas resources, they are not like distributed evenly as per need. So really it is important to have a floating solution in those areas where it's difficult or challenging to build onshore solutions and to liquefy those gas. So under these circumstances, not stranded areas anymore. So the industry or us as EPC, what we're dedicated to is to develop more solutions to the industry or enabling liquefaction for the pipeline gas or the offshore gas directly above the wellhead. And to deliver such a project, so we have to do a lot of, as an EPC, we have to do a lot of like preparations from many aspects. And echoing back like the Maria just mentioned, is you really need to have such flexibility where you need to have like either actual solution, where you have to the nearshore solution and offshore solution. And you need to consider the local requirement or the regulatory. We have to engage really closely to all the government and class. And ultimately, I guess, the meaning of a floating LNG is to provide or enable the liquidity of natural gas as an important transition energy in a cost-effective way, in a safe way and friendly, environmentally friendly way to the area what's needed. And what we could contribute, or the EPC could contribute in this aspects, is really to have a complete like catalog of the solutions here and bring down as much as possible CapEx and OpEx. So what you see now in the industry is we have new build solution, like what Wison is specialized. And you can see as some operators like Gola, and they are looking at the conversion solution. So although there are different approaches, but the purpose here is to deliver something like with lower cost, lower emission, to enable the feasibility of the, or bankability of the project, because at the end, you need to have the right economics metrics or the economy model to be able to launch to materialize such a project. LNG is really not an easy thing. We see many projects, maybe they are already around the market for decades, right? So it's important to help them to have a right solution to plug in the equation and to make the whole project bankable. Just one more thing to add is, as Wison like to bring down the CapEx, we really heavily leverage the supply chain advantage to have everything built in China. And so to avoid like not to avoid, but to take advantage of the very concentrated industry cluster in China. So finally, we can really deliver something like cost at a very, very comparable, competitive cost to the developers and to the energy companies to make LNG affordable to the whole industry.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maria, on follow-up to that, so we have seen, if we compare the last 10 years, what the segment has achieved in terms of technical complexity. So we started with the experimental prototype solution. Mm-hmm. Now we have deep sea, FLNG, we have FSRUs, we have nearshore solutions, we have at-key solutions. So what's next for the FLNG segment?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I think that what's coming next is what our clients will push us to do. Just like Carolina said, we will need to adjust to the requirements of the clients for sure. And every day they are more demanding. The more you are able to do in the industry, the more they ask for. So for sure, they will bring us great challenges. I think that we have a wide span of options today, from the very pilot, low send-out rates or low liquefaction production rates to the very large ones. And I want to highlight something. You mentioned at the start the complexity of these projects. I think that with this diverse panel, it's very clear that there's a lot that needs to be considered for the development of the projects, but there is an essential factor that we have not mentioned, and it's the operability and maintainability of these units. We build units to be working operational for 10, 15, 20 years. They need to be operable. They need to be maintainable. And that is something that go hand in hand with the engineering, with the design, all the preparation that we need to do, the early involvement of personnel, the training of the personnel, and the new technologies and the new challenges that are coming ahead. This is essential to be able to make these projects work. So I don't have an answer, a direct answer, what is coming next. I'm very much looking forward to that because I'm sure it will bring great challenges for all of us, from the executors to the authorities to the suppliers of equipment. We mentioned at some point customization, and I think that that is key. That's what the floating solutions are for. To deliver solutions, to comply with the requirements, to expand and improve technology that enables us to provide more for a longer time.
Thank you. Carolina, so you mentioned the electrons. So what about the floating solution as enablers for the molecules of gas for the market?
Floating storage as enablers for the molecules of gas?
Yes.
Definitely. I think the floating solutions have historically been enablers of the gas market in Latin America and elsewhere as well. I think we have great examples in the room. I think Colombia is right now a very important example that we're collectively living through, which is there is local gas, but they also need LNG. How to solve that? So the LNG is coming online to make sure that gas availability remains supplied in the country, as it's a country that really demands gas. Brazil is, of course, a very obvious case as well, where there is local gas. There is a lot of local gas, but it's about what can we do with that gas. The Brazilian gas that we produce is not flexible. It's associated gas. It needs a base load type requirements. It needs to go to a base load type project. So what LNG does is what the local gas cannot do. So LNG and floating solutions have definitely been an enabler in that specific market to make sure that there is this dispatchability and flexibility. And over there, it's quite interesting because FSRUs and floating solutions in Brazil has been very specific to gas to power, but what a lot of our colleagues in the industries are doing, and granted not BW yet in Brazil, but hopefully very soon, but many of them have already done, is actually after coming and after being enablers of a power plant on the electron side, connecting at a later stage as a second stage of the project to the grid. So kind of the inverse of actually what FSRUs came about in a historical way to do. So we have inverted that. But what that does to the grid in Brazil is that creates in the grid a very specific project which wasn't there before, Mary, which is, again, gas that is flexible. So the Brazilian grid had no flexible gas. And with LNG being regasified, that can definitely be available right now, which is very good for many industries that are transitioning to greener solutions. So Brazil is also a case where floating solutions has enabled expansion of the gas market. And then we are in El Salvador, where the floating solution was the solution to bring gas to the country and bring LNG to the country. And look at what that has done. That has definitely created a market for gas, a market for LNG, which has now flown through electrons. So electrons enabling the gas market to come about. And LNG now is responsible for 30% of the country's power demand, power need. So, and others to come, right? I think, I mentioned before, but I think Guatemala is also looking into LNG and floating solutions to enable expansion of the gas market. I think Ecuador has for some time and many years now also tried to aggregate, and I'm sure it's coming very soon. We're very excited in looking at that to do the same, to use a floating solution, LNG floating solution to expand that market. So I think there's a lot of room. I totally agree with Maria. I don't think onshore and floating necessarily compete. I think there is room for many solutions. I think many countries need different solutions. We are very diverse. Our region is extremely encouraging in terms of opportunities. And if we do take a look at all of the specificity and customization and tailor-made solutions that we can provide, this is definitely something that can make the market grow.
Absolutely. Terence, you mentioned initially that about the importance of adhering to local regulations, be it at the state or the federal level, depending on the country, but sometimes those regulations do not exist, they are not present, or they are not enough for the kind of the project being developed. So how could you support, as a class society, establishing a robust framework for compliance?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Mehdi. So one of the things, again, that ABS does is we do work with a lot of the regulators. We have relationships with port authorities, U.S. Coast Guards, things like that. And there's typically a standing MOU or some type of agreement with those bodies. We offer training. One of the things we do is we will hold like a workshop for our clients and the regulators to educate them on what a FLNG is or just whatever offshore structure it is. And then vice versa, the clients will try and work together to interface their goals with the environmental regulations and things like that. So that's one of the things we do. In new markets, you know, I'll mention Guyana and Suriname, right? That's a very emerging market. It's a popular market. Everyone's talking about it. When we first established, you know, ourselves down there were no FPSOs, there were no offshore, there was nothing. So one of the first things we had to do was talk to them about these projects and let them know, like, hey, we've done this before. It can be safe. There'll be minimal impact to the environment if it's a offshore, nearshore, kind of depending on that. And ultimately, the main thing is the safety of the people on board, and then obviously the environment, things like that. So that's just it. The early engagement is always important. So for us, being able to establish, you know, who's the regulators, who's the port authority or whatever, and being able to interact with them, even on behalf of the client, is important because we can, I guess, ease a lot of the stress with dealing with the government or regulators and things like that because they can be very strict. And again, like we mentioned, you know, if the goal here is to monetize your gas and return on investment, those are things that can definitely slow down the project. Again, you know, we're talking about a very, you know, LNG is safe and all that, but it's still a floating plant. So if you want to put this plant near shore in our country and our environment, we want to make sure it's safe. So that's one of the things we do, and it's yeah, it's a good practice for us.
Perfect. Juan, so an LNG vessel, it's a massive ship. When it's loaded, there is another a level of complexity in terms of loads. An FLNG is worse, I guess, yes? So the mooring lines, they are chain or synthetic ropes or combination of both?
Yeah, and I'll see, according to that, we're out of time, so I'll be quick. So
it's flipping up and down, I don't know if
you had 20 minutes and now it's 0. I don't know what happened. So anyway, so I will answer your question, but let me go back to the first one because I forgot something very important, like what is to consider for a mooring system, to design a mooring system. And one very important component is the interaction with the vessel owners because especially for, when it's FLNG, normally they are built from scratch. It's a new build. So of course, the mooring system will be designed hand in hand with the vessel. Sometimes we are, for example, we're doing Coral Norte. So the turret is being built in Malaysia. And of course, Samsung is doing the vessel in Korea. So then we will need to bring the turret to integrate it with the vessel in Korea. So those kind of interfaces and all that is very important. But when it's an FSRU, most of the time they are LNG carriers conversions. And FSRUs are, we are very used to FPSOs that are like, you know, crude oil tankers. But FLNGs and FSRUs are not as strong as an FPSO. So the modifications be done, and I know like the vessel owners, they don't like They like minimum intervention, minimum modifications in their vessels because, as Maria said, the Caribbean FLNG was in Colombia, then in Argentina, then in Congo. This thing can move somewhere. And it doesn't mean that the mooring system that works in one place maybe cannot work in another place. So it has to be flexible. So that interaction has to be well planned to try to do the minimum intervention modifications in their vessels. But it's a challenge. Now, about mooring lines, yes, you're right. Depending on the water depth, like for shallow water, normally it's just chain. But when you go to deep water and ultra deep water, then you have a combination of chains and polyester ropes. In fact, we are pioneers utilizing polyester, first back in the 90s in the Barracuda FPSO for Petrobras. That was 800 meters, and 800 meters back then was deep water. Of course, it's very deep, but nowadays we deal with 3,000 meters, which is ultra deep water. So, of course, it's a combination of chains and polyester ropes. Of course, there has to be a mooring analysis, a detailed analysis to see what is the best combination for optimizing, as you say, very big units that have to be in a station for 15, 20, 25 years, so they better be well moored. So, yeah.
Thank you. So, Celso, the last question will be for you. So we talk about incorporating those solutions into the design. What about upgrading existing facilities?
Okay, the time says 0, but I'll answer. Yeah, like I said, that's a reactionary thing, and that's very difficult, right? So you would have to do, again, more analysis, more modeling. And, you don't want to just solve for the problems of today. You want to have a projection of that with the modeling because of worsening sea conditions, worsening weather conditions, and also the frequency of these conditions are, where it was, 2 months out of the year, 3 months out of the year. Now you're looking at, wow, it's 6 months out of the year. So you have to look at a solution that's right for your application that impacts you the least when you have to install it, right? So yeah, there's, any number of solutions you can have. You can extend a breakwater. You can, build a buoyed berth. You can look at all these things, but how long is that going to put you out of service, right? So you have to see the one that impacts you the least, that doesn't impact your revenue stream. And again, I can't emphasize enough, it's better to do it up front before you go in service than to try it and retrofit this stuff later. I mean, we love the market, them calling us, but even like our dynamic mooring is not the solution for everything. So,
thank you. So thank you for all the panelists for the insightful points. It was really interesting to hear about this. If you have any questions, we don't have enough time, but feel free to catch up after the session or outside, and we can discuss and expand more. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a este destacado panel, a cada uno de ellos, nuestros 6 expositores, y al moderador, el señor Mehdi Tuil, que nos ha acompañado a moderar justamente este primer panel de la mañana. Se les hace entrega aquí en el Foro Internacional Global de la Industria del Gas Natural Licuado 2025, su presente, cada uno de ellos, por habernos acompañado esta mañana. Y las fotos de rigor que serán compartidas, como venimos diciendo desde el día de ayer, en las redes sociales, tanto personales como también de nuestra